right, so today we have Josh Pantony, CEO of Boosted AI, which you can find at boosted.ai. Taglines are AI, purpose-built for finance, love it. And also cut through data overload, outpace competitors, reclaim your time with Boosted AI's Alpha, the agentic AI platform built to help your team win the future of finance. And with that, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Fantastic to be here.
All right, so I guess we'll talk broadly about AI and finance on this episode, but basically, I guess give us a very short overview of the state of Alpha, which is your flagship product, what it is, what it can do today, and who's the target user.
Yeah, excellent place to get started. I actually do like to describe it as an AI-powered terminal. It's a system where you can come in, you can teach it the type of work and workflow that matters for you. It will then go out, learn about your needs, build work for you proactively, and then enhance your entire workflow process. And we specifically focus on portfolio managers, analysts, hedge funds, and groups like that. But I think it has broad applicability.
And you used the phrase agentic AI, and so
Yeah.
I guess just for our sake of our listeners, so from your perspective, how does that differ from traditional generative AI or rule-based systems?
So there's three ways you can kind of think of this. The current system, the current state of the world, is generally speaking, you ask a question and you get an answer back. And I think the way a lot of people think about agents are you ask a question, it does even more work, and you get a longer answer back. The way we think about agents is a tad bit different. We think of it as trying to build almost like these workers where they learn a task and they do that task for you forever. So they do that, every time an earnings call comes out, they're going to give you a summary in a particular way. Every time you get an email from someone about a stock in your watch list, it'll notify you and put something on your way. If you're trying to do something like extract out key financial metrics in a very specific way, it'll do that every time automatically for you. So for us, agents are really about doing long-range work and doing long-range work in a repeatable fashion consistently.
So many listeners have probably touched base with tools like deep research offered by many of these foundation model providers. So in many ways, that's like the canonical agent for people. So it sounds like from what you describe, what you have is deep research, but you don't have to even prompt it. It just does something for you once you kind of let the agent know, hey, I'm perpetually interested in something about AMD or NVIDIA.
Yeah. The way I like to describe it is today's world is kind of like the Google experience. You come in, you give a prompt, and you get an answer back. Tomorrow's world, the world we're building towards, is more like the YouTube or TikTok experience. You show up, it knows who you are, and then it's just going to be constantly suggesting valuable things to do on your behalf. You'll still query YouTube sometimes, but most of how you consume YouTube is through things it thought were valuable for you. Similarly, for products like ours, most of how you'll interact with it will be consumption-based through stuff that it is giving to you where you don't even have to think about it.
So it's purpose-built for finance. So here, feel free to not answer based on your comfort level, but under the hood, then I suppose what sets you apart are one, data sources, and two, I'm not sure what the answer to this is, but do you have your own model? Is it fine-tuned, or are you just a wrapper for a foundation model?
Yeah, number two is a big answer. Functionally speaking, there's a bunch of very idiosyncratic challenges in finance that needed to be solved for. You need to be extremely auditable. Not enough to just to tell the user it's this or that. You need to be able to give them, here's the exact primary source I came from, here's the methodology I used, here's how I'm thinking about it. And you need to be able to do it in a way that a user can understand. You also need to be almost like infinitely scalable, right? If I want to know what my portfolio exposure is to China, it's not sufficient to look at 5 or 10 examples. You need to be able to analyze every single stock in a portfolio and understand deeply for every stock in that portfolio exactly how are they exposed to China. And then you need confidence that the system is going to run the same way. If it analyzes my portfolio exposure to China today and it runs again tomorrow, it's going to do it in the exact same way, the exact same methodology, et cetera. Um, and these are all things we're very, very good at. You can go into a product like Perplexity and ask for deep research, and it might look at like 37 different articles. You can go into our product and it will look at uncapped tokens. We have users that have agents running that look at 4 billion tokens a day. And that's just getting started. We're actually seeing the upper level of what people are building in our system scale to really high levels. Also, in order to be able to do this like monitoring of the world, you need something that can understand delta information. You need to be able to understand if something changed in the world, now versus 10 minutes from now. That's something we do very well. And then in terms of how does that technology actually work under the hood, that gets very, very complicated. But the easiest way I like to describe it is we're almost like a large language model choir, where we have a whole bunch of different large language models, some of which are going to be from the standard players like Anthropic and OpenAI, some of which we've highly tuned internally, and they've all been configured in such a way that they work very well together to produce these, high fidelity results.
So obviously you operate in finance, which is a regulated industry. So
Yeah,
you talked about some notion of transparency and explainability.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, these are not deterministic models, right? So they're still probabilistic.
yeah,
So in other words, Josh, if I run the model today
yeah,
and I get a certain response, which prompts me to place a trade,
yeah,
and then that trade blows up in my face.
yeah,
And then my boss goes, "Why did you place that trade?" Well, I prompted this thing and then it gave me this. Let's go back then and reprompt it. And then lo and behold, it gives me a different answer. My boss fires me.
yeah,
So how do you so you talked about auditability. So to me,
yeah.
auditability means some level of reproducibility, right?
Yes, 100%. You're exactly right. Yeah, and actually, like a very big part of that is our system is much less, uh, much more deterministic, for lack of a better word, than other systems. It's still LLM based, but we've found ways to sort of confine or force specific behavioral patterns, such that if it does something one way today, it'll do it the same way tomorrow. Um,
So
and that's also something that's quite
are
different.
so is there are there rules there?
The way I like to think about it is kind of similar to two old school computer science paradigms. So when you're writing code, you'll build what's called unit tests and you'll build what's called integration tests. Unit tests are a way of basically showing like, is a local block of code operating in the right way? Integration tests are like, is the whole thing operating the same way? In a similar kind of vein, as we're building out these little workers, we're basically checking like locally across each of our subtasks, what are the set of conditions we want to force, and is it following that set of conditions? And then globally, what are the set of conditions we want to force, and is it following that set? I'm skipping over huge complexity in how that actually works, but it's how we sort of force it and allow it to do very, very specific actions in a very specific way consistently.
By the way, I mentioned rules because there's nothing wrong with rules. I mean, I think if you look at Waymo and some of the self-driving cars,
Mhm.
I think they have a combination of perception and rules, right? So
Yeah,
uh, people think that rules are are a dirty word, but they actually work, right? So
yeah, yeah. We think of rules as a great way to confine behavior. Um, but you want to unlock the intelligence of the LM, if that makes sense. So the intelligence comes from the LM, but heuristics rules are a way of sort of sandboxing the LM to do the set of things you cared about.
the two main developments on the foundation model side of late, one is multimodality.
Hmm.
Second one is reasoning.
Hmm.
So how do you take advantage of both? So first of all, I guess multimodality, I assume that, a lot of these a lot of information might be buried inside podcasts and some interview that, would be hard for you to kind of monitor all of that as a human being, right?
Yeah,
Secondly, uh, reasoning is great, but it can get expensive, right?
yeah,
So you want to make sure that you use reasoning when you actually need it. So tackle both of these things.
yeah. I'll start with reasoning as a starting point. One of the big advantages of selling to hedge funds and banks and ETF providers is there's much less price sensitivity.
Oh yeah,
If
I worked in a hedge fund. I mean, we didn't care what the price was as long as it worked and gave us
yeah,
alpha.
yeah, and that's 100% correct.
Yeah.
And so even if I'm just 20 or 30 or 50% better and I cost 10 times as much, it's still
I,
a
I
worthwhile
yeah,
trade.
I don't care. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, to answer, how do we think about that? We primarily optimize for quality, and where we're going to be inferior to a large horizontal player is we're going to be a heck of a lot more expensive, but you're getting way more capability
But
for that expensive trade-off.
Josh, there's also the quality of the trade-off between quality and latency, right? So
Mhm.
so user experience, right?
Totally.
Right. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, from that standpoint, a big part of how we think about it is certain types of tasks can be done fast. Certain types of tasks need more work. And we need to be able to figure out which is which very quickly on behalf of the user. If a user asks, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, we should be able to answer that in seconds. If a user says, what is the compensation history for the CEO of NVIDIA and how does it compare to his peer group? Then you don't want to just spit out the first article you see from the web. You want to go through like every SEC filing covering compensation going back over 10 years. And you want to look at NVIDIA's peer group and you want to extract out all of their SEC filings. And then you want to do an analysis and then you want to normalize and you want to produce a table. And getting that quality of output is going to take a lot longer. And I think users can kind of understand that. Users can kind of understand, like, they expect intuitively who's the CEO of NVIDIA to be very fast. If the system communicates, hey, I'm going to do a whole bunch of work, and here's what that work looks like, and here's the results you're going to get at the end of it. Would you like me to do that work? Yes or no? And then there's a high quality product at the end of that. People can get that as well. I think that the one thing I think is going away, or that I really don't like about other products paradigms, is there's a lot of products out there where they have like a fast mode and a deep mode. Um, and I actually think that's a terrible user experience. I think a system that can dynamically figure out what the user's intent is and communicate to the user what it's doing is much better, and that's how we think about it.
so multimodality.
And then on the other side of multimodality, um, I think it's going to matter actually in two ways. So way number one is, as you pointed out, there's just more and more information that you can access, and that's already starting to happen.
By the way, for our listeners out there, you probably know Gen Z and younger, they don't consume text. They go for video and audio.
Yeah, well, I'll get to that in a second. I'll get
Yeah.
into the other ways it's important.
Yeah.
On the first side, though, it's on the consumption. And I think in particular in finance, there's a lot of very important information that's actually trapped in images, where the image plus the text gives you context, right? You may see a graph with a pie chart, and then the text will explain what that pie chart is. And so that's unlocking the ability to access like richer, more powerful pieces of data that were just hard to do in an automated fashion before. The other way we think this matters is we think the way that you're going to engage with this technology is going to change. And so, like with our product today, you still come in, you can talk to it a little bit. It'll start talking to you right when you start coming into the app. But we see a future where you're driving to work and you come into Alpha and summarize my day for me, and it just immediately starts laying out. Here's an update on all the broker research that came in for these specific stocks in your universe. Here's key report that's coming out today that you might want to take a look at. You have a conversation, and it keeps engaging. And part of the way that we think about those modalities changing is, like, today, again, when you go to like an OpenAI and you talk to OpenAI, I'm usually talking about a specific task. It's usually like, I want you to do this thing for me, right? Maybe I'm having a little bit of a conversation. We see the future as changing a little bit, where both technology like ours will be producing more audio and maybe even video outputs. but also the system will talk to you to just to get to know you better, right? When I'm talking to, as a portfolio manager, if I'm talking to a human analyst, we're shooting the breeze, we're talking about general trends, we're having a conversation, and that extra context that has on me, the human has on me, makes it easier for them to do high quality work. In a similar way, we see a future where you're just kind of talking to these products very friendly, like you would another person, and is getting richer context on you. So the multimodality matters both from like, here's more data that we can grab, but also it's going to change how we interact with technology, and that's going to be a big shift too.
But so on the multimodality front, right? Let's take something specific. Let's say Tesla or Nvidia, right? So obviously there's analyst reports that you can monitor and all of these things, right? But my point is that a lot of alpha might be buried in some obscure podcast or video
Hmm. Hmm.
that some technical person is breaking down why is this going to be a challenge for this company in the future,
Hmm.
but the analyst reports are not reflecting that yet. So
Hmm.
you almost have to go into all of these pieces of content to get ahead of the analyst. So,
Yeah.
or do you care about getting ahead of the analyst, or
Yeah.
or you only summarize for me what the consensus analyst thinking is saying, right? So,
Yeah. I mean, podcasts and things like that matter, but I actually think there's another form of multimodality that matters more here.
yeah.
A huge portion of an analyst job is going out and talking to people at investor relations firms, going to conferences and meeting with people, interacting with them, and basically having conversations like this, talking to experts, different things like that, right? And today, that conversation happens, it gets synthesized in the analyst's head, and then later it comes out in a report. But we actually see a world where products like ours are actually with you, going about the day with you as this stuff's happening, and then able to like put together all the context, all the piece of information, every piece of information from your email, every piece of information from your watch list, every piece of information from the 10Ks, every piece of information from the earnings calls, plus all this context that's now happening in this like dynamic conversation. And its ability to like consume data that you are sort of producing yourself as you're going about your job. I think that'll be very, very interesting and actually the biggest unlock. Certainly podcasts help, but the ability to have an agent that can actually sit down with
No,
you,
I'm
calls.
yeah. I guess my point with podcasts is that there's a lot of public content that might be ignored by traditional analysts.
Yeah,
It
I
could
definitely think that's
be,
true.
for one thing we know, for all we know, there might be podcasts in Chinese that talk about semiconductors that are
Yeah.
going to be very critical that we just don't know, right?
Yeah, 100%. Actually, that is already a very big unlock. One of the like really popular use cases in our system is looking at companies that have exposure to China. So, as an example, if you look at a company like Domino's, Domino's has huge growth happening in China, and it's hard to track that, month over month. We've had people that have built agents in our system where they're going to like Baidu Maps and looking at how many locations day to day for Domino's are popping up, and then they can use that to start making predictions about where Domino's prices, the revenue is going to go, right? So that's a really good example of this kind of multimodal you're talking about, where I'm going to a map, I'm interacting with that map, I'm grabbing stuff from that map, I'm learning really interesting information. It's all public, but nobody was really able to consume it before. Now you can consume it trivially and get very unique source of insight.
I'm not sure if this is proprietary information, but what's the breakdown of your usage between buy side and sell side?
Uh, I think I could talk about that in broad strokes. I think we're currently in the range of like maybe 70% or so on the buy side, and then 30% on the sell side. And then on the sell side, you could kind of break it out between like sell side analysts and junior bankers. But we're primarily buy side clients.
And most of your users are non-technical analyst types. Who-
Mostly fundamental users. Yeah, the vast majority.
And the typical user, do they, how much time do they spend on the product, and how many of these background agents do they end up relying on?
It's really interesting. You see this like curve. Uh, so like a new user will usually it really just takes like one or two high value agents to start getting unlocked, right? So maybe you start using an alpha agent for building a financial model. And if you are a person who spends a lot of your life building financial models, this saves you so much time. You're going to keep doing that. Maybe you have a little agent whose job is to like scan through your email inbox and then just summarize any sell side data you got about specific stocks in your inbox. It starts with one or two things like that. But then our like power users, I mean, we have some that have like hundreds of these little workers operating, consuming like billions upon billions of tokens. And so we actually don't know what the cap is. But we know that you get initial value with as few as like one or two agents.
So I invite you to a conference to give a keynote. I ask you in 3 slides, I give you 3 slides, give me the top 3 examples of amazing case studies or use cases of Alpha. I guess without giving away the client's identity or
Yeah,
actual, you can just be vague about how
yeah,
they
yeah,
used it and what was the impact.
yeah, absolutely. So there's probably three use cases I would talk about. The first is key financial metric extraction. Second would probably be email monitoring. And then the third, let's do a superpower use case. Third would be like a deep dive analysis on the video. So let's talk about all of those. So on the first one, if you are a buy side analyst covering 20 to 35 stocks or a sell side analyst covering 20 to 35 stocks, you very likely spend a large portion of your life extracting out key financial metrics. So key financial metrics, peer comparables, industry comparables, things like that. And you probably spend a huge amount of your time still going into investors' presentations, hitting Control F or just manually scanning through it, hitting Control C, hitting Control V, and then putting it into a deck. In fact, I've met junior bankers where they spend as much as 40% of their time doing this task and other related tasks for building up financial models. And the reason that they do this, as an aside, is like the Bloomberg terminal has a screen that does KPIs, S&P has a screen that does KPIs. All of them still do it manually. And the reason is that they have very idiosyncratic needs. There's like usually a very specific definition of the kinds of numbers they care about. Also, the way one company reports a number might be different than how another company reports a number. And so there's a bunch of work that has to go into like normalizing and making sure that like, let's say company A reports Asia as revenue, company B reports China as revenue. How do I make sure I'm comparing apples to apples? Generally speaking, you have to get these numbers done fast. Like as soon as an earnings call happens, you have 30 minutes to send out an email to your boss. You have to be 100% correct about these numbers. And as I said before, they have to match your specific idiosyncratic definition of what those numbers care about. And so in the old world, lots of people were just manually extracting. Now with Alpha, you can build a little worker that can extract the numbers exactly how you care about it, find trends earlier, give you hard confidence in the numbers through the ability for it to give an audit trail exactly how it did it, and then sort of free your brain to start doing work that you really care about. So that would be like one example, key financial vector extraction. The other one I really like talking about is email monitoring, just because I get hundreds of emails a day, probably thousands. And that the way to kind of think about that is like imagine building out a little worker where it scans through every email you got and then does it cross topic. So for me, I have a little worker that's like, all right, here's all the VCs that reached out to me. Here's all the podcast requests. Actually, I don't have that many. Here's all the examples of stuff happening with other competing startups or other people in my network, whatever. If you're a portfolio manager, you may have something that says like, here's all my watch list of stocks I care about, and here's all the analyst updates, or here's all the sell side updates I got over the past day for each of these. If you're a trader, this might give you the ability to automate the process of writing a morning note in a really like clean, consistent way. So second one would just be kind of like email-based workflows, for lack of a better word. And then I'm going to give you what we like to call a superpower use case. Let's say it was last year, and Blackwell there was the NVIDIA Blackwell chip delay. And you're trying to figure out what are the implications of that? How does it affect the stock? Classically, you would try to do this by calling up the investor relations team, maybe talking to some experts, looking at sell-side data. You're still going to do that in the modern day, but you could use our technology to scan through 3,000 companies' earnings calls, summarize across all of them, who are the main companies that who are the main companies that are still excited about working with the video, who are some of the companies that are looking for alternative providers, and from there overall, what are some of the main disruptions that might happen to NVIDIA, right? And that ability to analyze like 3,000 companies' contexts while analyzing NVIDIA is something people would have loved to be able to do for years, but just fundamentally couldn't until our technology came along.
So let me revisit a question I asked earlier, because I'm sure the audience will want me to drill down further on this, the models.
Yeah.
So are the models proprietary? You have your own model that you fine tune. There's no singular model. I get it. So
Yeah.
it's a mixture of experts. But
Yeah. Yeah.
give us as much as you are comfortable
Yeah.
to describe your models and how different are they?
So the way we think about it is we want to be very well positioned to sort of surf the wave of the best LM day to day.
Right.
And so at a high level, we
So
have
you design some sort of model agnosticism, right? So to some
yes,
extent, right?
to the extent that we can do that. Yeah. So at a high level, we have almost like an internal reasoning model that's able to do task decomposition. So if I go back to that, like I want to build a financial model problem, right? It might say, okay, step number one, I've got to learn everything I can about the company to figure out like what the main metrics for financial model should be. Step number two, I have to get all the data articulated in one spot so that I can do the analysis. Step number three, I have to extract out all the numbers. Step number four, I have to build a financial model. Step number five, I have to link all the pieces together, maybe produce an Excel or a piece of software, and then hand that off to the user. So at a high level, we have an internal model that can basically do that kind of like task decomposition and then figure out like a bunch of like subtasks.
And that's your own model.
That's us. Yeah. And then after it does that task decomposition, it then goes across like each of these sub areas. And we basically have like a series of benchmarks that we run internally across different tasks. So we know for stuff related to what we'd call tensor manipulation, but basically like large mathematical operations. There's a whole bunch of like stuff that we'll test around doing that, around manipulating time series data and other kinds of metrics that appear a lot in finance. We have a bunch of metrics related to like analyzing foreign data. We have a bunch of metrics related to like analyzing, basically extracting information from tables. And after we do that decomposition, already like every time a new model comes out, we run it across a suite of benchmarks, and we kind of know like, okay, right now maybe Sonnet 3.7 is the best at doing math operations for a whole bunch of matrix. Maybe GPT 4.1 is the best at like reading Chinese data. Maybe
and you don't
Gemini.
And Josh, you don't rely on public benchmarks. You have your own benchmarks.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. For each of the tasks that we care about.
Yeah. Well, this is very important, listeners, because basically public benchmarks are a good filter for initial top candidates, but nothing beats hammering it against your own data.
100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. Yeah. So then what that lets us do is basically, after we do the task decomposition, we then know the best LM for each of those subtasks. They just run. And then at the very end, the last area that we have our own sort of spice, for lack of a better word, is we have another internal, what we'd almost call like an authenticator model, where its job is to basically go through like, what are all the conclusions we made? What's everything that we just said? What are all the facts that back up that information? And then can I actually verify those facts? Is the information we gave sufficient to verify the facts that we presented to the user? And so the way we think about it is like, we want to be very, very good at like the high level reasoning for finance, very, very good at the verification that we get at the other end for finance. And then the middle part of the sandwich is the best LM for solving the set of tasks that are presented.
So early on, when you were developing Alpha, I'm sure it wasn't perfect. There were growing pains. So on the opposite side of my earlier question, can you share some kind of early disaster story? Like it hallucinated something that was completely off, and you don't have to, and then maybe give us an idea of how you fixed it.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing has been aligning user expectations, for lack of a better word. Like the very first version that we built out was specifically designed to only look at financial data. And our thesis at the time was like, people only want, like, if you're an investor at a hedge fund, you're only going to want super high quality data from a verifiable source like a sell side set or 10K or an analyst call or whatever. That was disastrously wrong. Like, you immediately started seeing floods of queries of things that were completely not expected. Well, we didn't expect. That made sense in retrospect. So like some of them could be kind of like funny things, like go to Wall Street Bets and summarize all the ideas. Yeah, there's people that like want a summary of.
Yeah.
There's professionals that want a summary of Wall Street Bet ideas.
Yeah.
Was very unexpected to me. There also end up actually being a lot of workflows that involve public data that are important. As an example, if you cover like consumer discretionary, it might be valuable to you to know how many products Target has where the price is increased or stayed flat versus the previous one. And so I think the biggest thing we very quickly learned with the first version of the product was it wasn't enough to only be specialized in finance data. We had to have deep agentic capabilities in a very wide area, but just focus back on the finance workflows. And so from there, we built out a very sophisticated web agent that can go to different websites, interact with different websites, pull information. So going back to that example, you could hypothetically now build an agent that goes to the Target website, grabs every product from the Target website, puts it in a table, and compares price month over month if you wanted to. We built out very sophisticated capabilities around just like searching and interacting with web data. We started building more capabilities around like integrating with internal emails, integrating with internal custom documents, a whole bunch of other stuff. So I think the biggest mismatch was just like how incredibly broad and powerful users expected this stuff to be out of the gate and how quickly we had to build those capabilities.
So what's your philosophy on data, Josh, specifically? So for example, some of this data in principle you could acquire. There might be someone who actually scrapes Amazon or Target and all
Yeah,
of that. But then you're dependent on this company continuing to exist and moving forward, and if you become reliant on that data source as part of your data fusion final step, then if the company disappears, you're screwed, right? So what's your philosophy of in terms of when do you acquire data and when do you go ahead and get the data on your own?
yeah. So I mean, number one, we want to work with the top data providers in the space. So we have partnerships today with groups like S&P, with smaller like groups like Quarter that provide like earnings and presentations. I think we work with about 20 different data vendors, and we have on the back of that over 60,000 news sources that we cover. We have 7,000 data series. So you'll have stuff like short interest. You'll have stuff like estimates, et cetera, in the system. So we wanted to make sure we had the highest quality premium data in the system on day one. And then in addition to that, you have the ability to basically like generate your own custom data sets vis-a-vis the system, and then use those custom data sets in other advanced ways. So you might build one worker that like, extracts all the target information I just talked about, and then you might have a second worker that looks at all the target price data and uses it to make a prediction about where revenue is going to go this quarter, as an example.
So you spent many years at Bloomberg, and
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends at Bloomberg and Bloomberg Beta. Why can't Bloomberg just build this into their terminal?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Functionally, I think the biggest problem that the existing incumbents have is that their classic moat has evaporated, and it's happened very fast, and they haven't fully adjusted to that. So,
By the way, for our listeners who are not aware, these Bloomberg terminals ain't cheap, man.
yeah, they're like $30,000 a year, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, here's some fast, quick, powerful stats for you. Bloomberg has, I think, few thousand people in Princeton whose full-time job is annotating data.
Oh my God.
S&P,
When I was at a hedge fund,
yeah,
my job was I was a lead quant. So
yeah,
my job was to design trading models. And, there were a few instances where you would go, certain option prices were off.
yeah,
You'd call Bloomberg, someone would actually pick up the phone in
yeah.
fix it on the spot. This
Yeah.
is how seriously they take their data.
Yeah, yeah, and they have an army of humans doing that. Similarly, at like S&P, LSEG, FactSet, like all of these have like thousands of humans, and these humans are, basically sitting at financial models and copying it from a financial model into a database, which then feeds into this broader system.
They still do that?
And they're still doing that today. Yeah, there's still thousands of people doing that.
Why
That creates.
why don't they automate it?
Why don't they automate it is a good question. I think in order to fully automate that job, you had to get to a high accuracy level. So,
Yeah.
our accuracy level is in the range of like 99.9%. We don't know how that compares to a human, but we suspect it's at or better than human level. So I think you had to get to that technology unlock, and that was not that trivial to do. But once you can now create data at a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the cost of the big data providers, right? So classically, the big incumbents had data as a moat, and I think that data has basically evaporated overnight. Okay, I'm going to tell you about the future a little bit. This is something that we don't have in our product yet today, but it's coming out fairly soon. The other area that Bloomberg had a big advantage, so they have like 15,000 screens. There's 15,000 screens, all hand coded by individuals. They spend about $1 billion a year on engineering.
So for our listeners, explain what a screen is.
So on the Bloomberg terminal, there's basically like a bunch of these different views that capture different things. So like, let's say I wanted to know what a company's debt maturing over time is. There's a screen on the terminal that I could go to that'll show me like all the debt it has and when it's going to mature.
And the commands are insane.
Yeah, it's like DOS commands. Yeah. To do what I just said, you'd probably type in XOM US F8 DE DDIS enter. It's like I don't know if you have any coders on your background, but it's like VI or Emacs or something like that. It's brutal to use. So I mean, classically, their moat was they had 15,000 screens that were all hand coded like this, and we now estimate that we can reproduce all those screens for about $1 million of compute, right? Like we now have the capabilities. We're moving up the capabilities in the next few months for Alfa to actually generate whatever UI you want, whatever screen you want, and that's going to make these incumbent products basically, from a technology standpoint, obsolete overnight.
And obviously, you can just prompt to get the screen
100%.
you want, right? So.
Yeah, and where I think it's going to get even more powerful is our technology will learn the kinds of screens you like, kinds of screens you don't like, and proactively build them for you on your behalf automatically. So you're going to get this hyper personalized experience, whereas something like the terminal is just static. It's the same thing for everyone.
And you missed one important lock-in of Bloomberg, which is the social network.
100%. Yeah, that's the one advantage they still have, and all the incumbents have. It's distribution, right? So that's the race.
The chat, right?
Yes, the instant Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, our thesis on that is when a disruptive startup like us reaches enough mass and scale, you'll be able to get to the point where you can start tackling chat and things like that as well, right? Like building a chat product today makes less sense because we're not at the same scale as Bloomberg. But I think the kinds of unlocks you get from a product like ours is just so far advanced over what you would get from something like a terminal that it's reasonably likely it's going to hit a level of scale fairly fast. And then when you hit that level of scale, the social advantage that you just talked about will also evaporate eventually. But they still have that. For today, they still have that.
So there's obviously those kind of neutral incumbents like Bloomberg, Reuters, and all that. But I assume you're also paying attention to what some of these in-house groups are doing, like at BlackRock or Goldman or JP Morgan Chase. I'm assuming they're building some sort of their own internal boosted, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of those internal builds going on. I'll be honest, I think most of the internal builds are just not going to be able to keep pace. I actually think the bigger disruption that's happening in our space right now is the horizontal players.
Anthropic just announced something in finance, right?
Yesterday, yeah. And Perplexity, had Perplexity, the few products they released, a month ago or something like that, I think that'll be the biggest disruptive force. And kind of our realization is when you get to the right concentration of talent density and surface area alignment, you reach this level of development and cadence that incumbents just straight up can't keep up with. And the sort of
And
interesting thing about it is
also focus, right? So they don't have the focus in finance,
yeah,
right? So they're in the case of Perplexity, they're burning so much cash,
yeah,
and now they're going to go into finance, but finance is never going to be a focus,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. When we think about ourselves, our ability to go really, really, really deep on the kinds of workflows we can do is definitely something that's a differentiator. But when I think about the incumbents, I just think that all of them are going to have trouble keeping up with the pace of AI companies. We're just able to move so much faster than what existed before.
So what are 1 to 3 things you would like to see from foundation models if you had a magic wand?
Oh my goodness, what a great question.
I would say here, I would say, give me smaller models that are just as good that I can operate much more cheaply and the latency is lower.
Yeah, I like all of those. Boy, that's like it's such a
So here,
cheaper, faster models would be excellent.
yeah, and then uh, push further ahead in this notion. I don't know if you follow this family of models called these large action models, which basically are the foundation models for agents. So think of agents as being able to do one thing, but these large action models are much more general purpose.
Yeah,
So they can read your screen and all of these things, right? So
yeah. Actually, you know what? I'm indexing too much to my company. Here's what I really want to see.
yeah.
I want to see embodied AI. I want to see like robots that can do my dishes. That's when we've really hit the true unlock here.
Right. So outside of finance, so what are the industries that you're drawing inspiration from? Just like you that are doing, are there any other examples of purpose-built AI that you draw
Yeah.
inspiration from?
Yeah, I think many of us, whether we want to admit it or not, owe a lot to Devon AI and what Cognition Labs did originally. I really think Devon AI was the first um,
So
product to show.
first, Josh, quickly remind our
Oh,
listeners what Devon AI is.
thank you. Sorry, Devon AI bills themselves as like a AI coder. It's a system where you give it tasks and it goes off and does that work. Um, and there had been attempts at creating these like consistent workflows before.
And it worked up to a point.
It worked up to a point.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I think they've probably, unfortunately, maybe fallen behind now. But when they first came out, they were really one of the first.
Claude Code, baby.
Cloud Code. I mean, I think you're starting to see Cursor start moving more in this direction. I really like Replit and Lovable. There's a
Yeah.
lot of products in that space now. But before Devon, you had Baby AGI, which was like probably one of the earliest attempts at an actual agent. But the UI experience of using it was terrible. It was just like you were watching a console. The really magical thing I think about Devon AI is you could go in there, you could give it a task, and then you could see how it was thinking about doing coding work. So I think for many of us, there was a lot of inspiration that got drawn from that. Other products in the category in this sort of space, I like. I really like both Replit and Lovable, and in particular, what I like about those products is the ability for them to create these little pieces of software that I can then share. I think that Anthropic was quite ahead with their idea of artifacts when they first built it. That was a very novel idea. And then, just going further out, everyone does this now. But I think one major innovation that Perplexity brought to the table was citations and giving citations for text. Now, all of us do it. We do it. It's a core part of all AI products. It's so seamless. We don't even think of it as an innovation, but it was actually very clever. And I think made very big changes. So there's lots we draw from, but there's kind of really interesting ideas all over the place that you can think about.
By the way, the thing about coding, which I find interesting, is uh, we may be heading to a point where we can only code if we're connected to the cloud, right? Because basically, you look at cloud code, right? So it is burning through so much compute to do something. I don't think my laptop can support that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Yeah, so that's why I also wonder if we need some innovation so that we can keep some of these capabilities on the edge. Like even what you're doing, right? So what if I'm offline and I still want to use Boosted, right?
Yeah, we're 100% a web product right now.
Yeah,
You'd be in
you know,
trouble.
I'm on an airplane and for some reason, I need to get some work done and I'm not connected to the cloud. And how do I keep using Boosted at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the other side note I'll make is I'm thinking way out here now, but I think there's a future where you've got an AI companion that's like always with you. You know, imagine you're like wearing a piece of glasses, you're having a conversation with someone, and it reminds you all the context on stuff that came up before. Or, you know, I'm visiting another country, I go to Korea, they're speaking to me in Korean, and it shows me subtitles as they're talking. Um, I think that's probably where everything's going to converge to at some point, where you've literally got this intelligence that's with you all the time, that's making all of us smarter, better human beings. But to get there, you need both high intelligence with fast latency and the ability to think more locally. And so I agree. There's a lot of cool stuff in that direction that's happening.
And so by the way, so going back to my inspiration question, so are there examples in other industries that you like healthcare that you caught your attention or anything like that?
Um,
You know, that you think Boosted can draw from some of the ideas
yeah,
of what these
th
people are doing.
this is gonna probably sound a little odd to you, but we like to look at a lot of like social media products.
Yeah,
And the reason we like
makes
to look at
sense.
a lot of
Makes
social
sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
there's so many like interaction patterns in how you communicate with people vis-a-vis WhatsApp or how you think about consuming stuff like TikTok or Instagram, um, where we think there are modalities there of how humans connect to each other that you can connect to how an agent connects with you. And so, you know, I can talk about a bajillion different AI products, but I'd say like the biggest thing we're looking at right now is how do humans communicate with other humans, and how do we mirror that in our product experience?
And in closing, Josh, for our listeners don't have deep pockets, so it's Boosted only aimed at institutional clients, or can retail investors take advantage of Boosted?
Anyone can go to boosted.ai and sign up today. It is free, and you can get direct access to it. We have institutional grade capabilities. We've been focusing on the top tier hedge funds for years, but recently we've started opening this up a little bit. And now, you know, more general retail users can get access to some of that really powerful technology.
Yeah, so the Wall Street bets ground.
I mean, there's a wide variety.
And with that, thank you, Josh.
So much.